Today on the Podcast Review Show, we're going to be talking the Short Time Wrestling Podcast.
Picking up your skin and get ready for a supersized serving of opinion. Delivering constructive criticism and powerful praise, it's the Podcast Review Show. This is the podcast that takes the guesswork out of first-time impressions. You'll discover new podcasts while learning podcasting tips. Join in on the conversation via voicemail, email, comments, and polls. It's all at our website, podcastreviewshow.com.
All right, welcome back to the Podcast Review Show. I'm your host, Dave Jackson, from the School of Podcasting.com, and we always start off the show letting you know that what you're about to hear is an opinion and only opinion, and you can agree with ours or you can disagree with ours, but we've been asked for ours, and tonight we have Jason Bryant of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast, and what we do is, well, Erik, why don't you explain what we do to Erik's show, to Jason's show.
Here on the Podcast Review Show, we review podcasts. It's crazy. We actually help you as the podcaster spotlight what you're doing right and help you do more of that, and then identify some items and some points and some low-hanging fruit that we might think you might be able to tweak to make your show a little bit stronger, and we call it the Podcast Review Show. And
the lovely tones of the one, the only Erik K. Johnson, better known as the Podcast Talent Coach. You can find him at podcasttalentcoach.com. And Jason, you are our special guest tonight. Thanks for coming on the show. Tell everybody where we can find your stuff.
Well, thanks for having me on, guys. It's at audio.theopenmat.com. It's where the Short Time Wrestling Podcast exists. It's basically a deliverable of our main website, which is theopenmat.com, a national wrestling media outlet. We've got broadcasts. We produce 2 digital magazines a month, so it's pretty much a one-stop shop for all your college, Olympic, and high school wrestling type of information. And the podcast is the next thing that we've kind of produced and started to develop for our listeners and readers.
And a digital magazine is, just curious?
Very similar to what you guys might be familiar with Pottertainment.
Okay.
It's an online magazine. We take some of our feature stories that are behind our paywall, and people they're subscribing to it, and we package it in a magazine type of format that's kind of geared for iPads and not necessarily e-readers as a whole, but I've got a lot of desktop publishing. I worked 8 years at a newspaper, so we were with a print magazine for about a year and a half, and that basically relationship soured, so we decided to take what we do well and package it into a digital format. And with digital, we don't have the overhead of the print costs or the shipping, so we've basically launched that about 6 months ago. It's kind of a restart-up kind of thing. But theopenmat.com has been around since 2008, 2009. So,
Jason, how many people do you have writing for your magazines?
Usually we have. Well, me, I'm the main writer. One of my business partners, he writes a column a month, and we've got 2 or 3 regular, consistent writers, and I do a lot of the feature writing and event coverage myself. So. The main draws with our magazines are the columnist. Andy Rovat was a 2008 Olympian. Matt Lindland fought in the UFC and was a 2000 Olympic silver medalist, 2001 world silver medalist, and currently now the new USA Wrestling Greco-Roman national team coach. So we've got some pull with notable names. Myself, I've been in wrestling covering it full-time for about 15 years. So I've got a couple writing awards, a couple broadcasting awards. So my name carries a little bit of respect within the sport of wrestling, so that's one thing we capitalize on just a little bit.
Very nice.
And what's the goal of the podcast?
Well, it's funny. It started, and this is actually my 3rd podcast. And Dave, when we talked about the consulting call we had about 2 weeks ago, the initial podcast, I didn't realize I was podcasting when I was podcasting the first time. This time, I'm looking at this. What was not being fulfilled by wrestling, and everybody's getting on message boards, and it's very internet driven. It's an internet sport. We've got 4 or 5 major websites that cover it, a couple magazines. But I was thinking, what could we do to give somebody a 5 to 10 minute basically recap, basically picture a Sports Center update. They throw it out every 20 minutes on ESPN radio. I was thinking, well, why not record a show for 5 to 10 minutes, and this is the genesis of where the name Short Time came from, because it's a wrestling term, meaning it's short time, there's 5 seconds left in the match, you'll hear a coach yell short time. So I'm thinking 5 to 10 minutes, you give the previous day's recap, you uploaded around midnight, 11:30, midnight. So people, when they wake up in the morning, they'll play it in the shower on their drive to work, and they've got the day's news, and then they'll come back to the website and read more about it. Or it'll be a way to say, hey, it's not just the main programs in the Big Ten. Here's something interesting that happened in Division II. Here's something interesting that happened in Division III. Just basically news nuggets that is kind of a morning coffee type of thing.
Got it. So it's Sports Center.
Yeah, and then the off season where there's no competition, very little competition, I went back to the interview format, and I've done a couple shows where I've done some news, like the show I'm about to release tonight or for tomorrow. It's only about a 15-20 minute interview. So I've got some news from this week that I'm going to throw in before the interview, and kind of that's where I think this is eventually going to go. Is I'll have an interview maybe once, probably stick to my twice a week, if not just one, and then during the year I would do 3 or 4 a week, because it always depends on the amount of news that happens. So if there's no matches on a Wednesday night, I'm not going to do a podcast. So that's where the scheduling is not really great, but I found a lot of people gave me some feedback on it, at least personally, and like, yeah, I like what you're doing. Those updates are great. I'll listen to it in the shower. So, it's an evolution of a process, and the interviews, the feedback, at least, again, not on iTunes because I've only got 2, but the feedback I'm hearing from our wrestling community and people that know me are like, yeah, they like it. So that's probably the format I'm going to end up going to is, the daily dose in the first 5 minutes of the show, and then you can stick around for the interview. Hopefully I've hooked you well enough to stick around and listen to the guest, who I feel is usually a very pertinent topic.
Well, I want to say bless you for not doing an episode when you have no content, because I hear a lot of people that do that, and it drives me bonkers. Even if you warn me, I have no content, so if you want to tune out now, Mike, then don't do a show.
Right. Stop treading water for no apparent reason. How long is the season, Jason? Like, how long are you in season?
College wrestling season typically starts first week in November, ends the third weekend of March.
Okay.
So if I can look at it, I've got, you guys we're talking about episode, what is it, 66?
65.
65, 65. So if I can look at it, I'm not sure I have everything. I think the interview started around 48, so I think I've done maybe 15, 20 interview-based shows, but there was probably 40-some episodes that were these daily dose type of things.
All right, nice. Well, enough talking about it. Let's take a listen.
Recent Iowa graduate and 2014 NCAA champion Tony Ramos has been known to burn a hole through his opponents by simply staring at them. He's made the world team at 57 kilos in men's freestyle and will head to Uzbekistan for the World Championships. We go one-on-one with Ramos and take your questions on episode 65 of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. You're listening to the Short Time Wrestling Podcast on theopenmat.com. I'm 3-time National Wrestling Writer and Broadcaster of the Year, Jason Bryant. I'll be taking you through the pertinent topics of the day with previews, reviews, and interviews. Short Time is presented by FlipsWrestling.com. Subscribe to the Short Time Wrestling Podcast on iTunes by going to theopenmat.com/iTunes. Visit Short Time on the web at audio.theopenmat.com to find out how you can listen on your favorite podcasting app. And get your wrestling news in a digitally delivered magazine format by going to theopenmat.com/subscribe and check out both of our digital magazine offerings. Now it's time, because we know you've always got time, for Short Time. Are you new to the podcasting format and want to know how you can listen on your smartphone, your computer, or other mobile device? Well, that's easy. Just head on over to audio.theopenmat.com/tutorial and find out how you can take Short Time on the road with you. Short Time Wrestling Podcast, we're talking with the U.S. World Team member in men's freestyle at 57 kilos. His name is Tony Ramos. Hails from Glenbard North High School out of Carroll Stream, Illinois. For those of you that don't know, that's a Chicago suburb. He's a 3-time high school state champion, junior world teamer in 2009, a 3-time All-American, and 2014 NCAA Division I champion. As we said earlier, a representative at 57 kilos. Tony, how are you doing in the wake of your championship of the U.S. World Team Trials?
I'm doing awesome. Just, let my body recover now and getting ready to go to training camp out in Arizona State.
We always like to ask the guest on Short Time a quick question about how they got started in wrestling. So What's your story, and how did you first get exposed to the sport, and why did you decide it was the sport for you?
Well, I really didn't have that much of a choice at first. My whole family wrestled, dad, my brothers. So I grew up around it. They started me wrestling when I was 3 because they wanted my older brother, Frankie, me, and Vince all to wrestle on the same team at least for 1 year. And that's pretty much how I got started, and I never looked back. It was something that just kept growing on me, and I love doing it.
You had said in a post-tournament interview that you weren't sure you were even going to compete. You were considering taking the year off, and you said it was your fiancée who put the idea in your head. Explain that conversation and what followed.
Well, we were sitting there watching the U.S. Open, and she knows how competitive I am. She knows how much, this means to me and what my goals are. It's something that's been talked about many times. We've had our discussions. But I had wanted to take the year off. We were getting married. I wanted to get all that done first before I made a run at it. But she knew what it meant to me, and she really pushed for it and just kept telling me, you got to do this. We'll find a way to make it work. I know you can beat these guys. Just kind of that stuff really, really got me thinking and really got me going. And finally went in, talked to Tom, and said, hey, let's do this. I want to go take the world by storm now.
Your fiancée, Megan, she's a volleyball player, right? So she's got a little bit of that competitive edge to her as well?
Yeah, she played volleyball at Iowa.
So I guess it's going to help to have another D1 athlete kind of there in the household going, come on, you can do this.
Oh, yeah, she's just as competitive as I am, and she knows the work and the time that I put in, so it's awesome having her there to push you that extra mile too.
So there we go. That's the first 4 minutes of the Short Time Wrestling podcast. Erik, I'll let you go first.
There's a lot jammed into this intro, and a lot I want to talk about. First of all, I love the production quality of your show, even though the guest is on the phone. I think the production quality, the elements that you've added into the show, just your overall delivery and your nature sounds very professional. I think it sounds very well done, like you have a lot of experience doing what you're doing. And I really appreciate that. I like the fact that you give your credibility and what makes you believable and somebody we should trust on the subject. I thought that was solid. I thought your audio quality was great. Sounds like it's produced in a solid studio right there. And overall, the introduction I thought was pretty strong. The one thing that you might work on with the introduction, it's loaded with a bajillion things. Like being the first time that I listened to the show, it was hitting me right and left, and I'm like, whoa! I started getting dizzy. The introduction. Let's just run down the bullet points of the introduction here. From before you even get into the interview, it starts with you're listening to the Short Time podcast. You kind of tease what we're going to get, and then the produced intro goes, you're listening to the Short Time podcast, the fact that it's on openmat.com, so now we have both names. I'm trying to figure that out. You introduce yourself, then you talk about, you're going to deliver the topics, the previews, the reviews, and the interviews. Then it's brought to you by the sponsor. Then subscribe to us on iTunes. Then visit the Short Time on the web at openmat.com. Then check out both of our magazine digital offerings. Now it's time for the show. But if you're new and you want to figure out how to listen to the podcast, we have a tutorial for you. And then we get to the interview. It moved quick, which I appreciated. I mean, we got to the meat of the interview in a minute and a half or so. But man, did you cram a lot of stuff in there, and it was dizzying. I had to go back and listen to it about 3 times just to write all of that down, just to keep track of it all. So my suggestion there was figure out what you really want to dive into there at the beginning. We can put a lot of that information on the website and drive everybody there so they can get all the information. You can mention the magazines within the interview or some stuff like that, just to figure out what the message that you want to get across, especially for first-time listeners in that introduction. Make them feel comfortable into your show and then jump right into it. But I might tighten it up a little bit there. Otherwise, I thought your delivery, your sound, the overall production of your show sounds solid.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like the production of it. I was like, wow, here's somebody who definitely, took some time to find some cool music. I like the music. I liked your voice. like the overall quality of it. Erik stole my answer. I love the fact that you gave your cred right at the beginning. I'm like, all right, here's somebody who I should listen to, not some guy down. Not that there's anything wrong with, podcasting next to the water heater. That's why I started. But it was like, okay, here's somebody who's been doing this for a while, won awards for it. So I was like, all right, way to nail that without being like cocky about it. It's like, oh, by the way, I've won some awards. I've been doing this for a while. So I thought that was a really cool way to throw that in the beginning. But yeah, my one really, the only thing that kind of got me through the whole thing was I still don't know what the name of your show is, because it's the Open Short Mat Wrestling something. I had to go back and listen, because even at the end, I think you actually said you're listening to the Open Mat. And I'm like, now is it the Open Mat or is it the Short Time? So I was the whole time when I was going back and making notes, I'm like, what is the name of this show? So that for me I found confusing. But other than that, I like the intro. To me, I'm an old guitar guy, so when you kick it off with a bass drum and some guitar, I'm hooked. And then the fact that it was nice and like Erik said, it was a lot of stuff, but it was moving. It wasn't like I was like, okay, and then what? It was like, and boom, and here's another one, and boom, and boom, and boom. So.
And Jason, with regard to Dave's confusion about the show name, when I went to your About page on your website and you discuss what the Open Mat is and what the Short Time is and a couple of your other offerings on the website About page, that explains it perfectly. Once I read that, I got to know exactly what you were doing. So maybe you take a little bit of that and add that into the introduction of the show and remove a few of these other things. Whether it's the I know the magazine is the thing you want everybody to go to, but reviewing you on iTunes and a lot of that housekeeping sort of stuff, if we remove some of that and put in what On the Mat is and the fact that that's the umbrella and the Short Times underneath that, along with the radio show and the other things you have going on, are all underneath the On the Mat, maybe that might clear some things up.
All right. And one thing I did notice, and I'm sure this is a question that's going to pop up here soon, Dave, while you were on the screen share, right now there's two shows within the Short Time element. The other one's called On the Mat, which could add maybe even a little bit more confusion. We haven't gotten to the point where that's got a following enough where I feel I can break that off into its own RSS feed. I do that for a former coworker of mine who does a show in Iowa on Wednesdays. So basically, to get that show more listens, because I think it's a quality program. That's my Wednesday offering. It's part of Short Time is the On the Mat program, produced by 1650 out in Iowa. So I'm not sure if you guys were going to touch on that, but I saw you on the website, and it's like one half is Short Time, the other side's On the Mat. So might be jumping ahead, but. But as far as the intro goes, yes, this is a concern, and I've actually tightened up the intro since then. It's still not tight enough, but I go back and listen to some older shows. I'm like, okay, wow. I mean, I'd have my wife listen to it, and she's not really a wrestling person. She understands what I do, and she understands what podcasts are, and it's like, that's really long. Or, one of the things was trying to do an intro saying, you're listening to Jason Bryant. Well, and then I listened to, it might have been Daniel that said, don't like say who you are in your own voice in the third person. So I went with that credibility thing. I think all three of you pod amigos, or what I'm calling you guys, with Ray, Dave, and Daniel, are kind of always say, tell us why we should listen to you. Like, you guys all kind of have that with your podcast intros, and I've kind of borrowed that technique, at least with my later intros. I'm going to try to stick with that, but that intro I'd like to get under a minute. Right now it's about 90 seconds.
The other thing,
I think if you figure out what you hope to accomplish with your introduction, what the whole goal and purpose is to suck people into the content and give your credibility, and then go back and look at all of the different parts you have in your introduction and figure out which ones are necessary to accomplish that goal, that might help you. If you start with the end in mind and work your way backwards, it might help you decide what to keep and what to eliminate.
The other thing, just so you know, and I want to verify this later, but earlier when I searched Short Time in iTunes, your podcast didn't come up. I had to type in Short Time Wrestling Podcast for that to come up. So that was something that I want to go back and double verify, because the one thing that's kind of unfortunate is the iTunes search, not the best on the planet.
So how would he fix that, Dave? How would he get Short Time to come up in iTunes? If his show is called Short Time Wrestling Podcast,
yeah, it's
and
in the
people just
title.
search Short Time.
Yeah, that's.
Is there some metadata or something that you
I
can
don't
put
know
in
if it
there?
has something to do with me being logged in. I just went to iTunes right now, and then you have to scroll down to podcasts, and it's the first thing listed.
Okay, like I said, I want to double check that because I was really surprised that it didn't, because it's in your title, and that's really the big thing that iTunes searches through is the title.
All right, now I got to try it.
Yeah. Well,
Which is funny because I had actually posted something on the Nick Silverling's podcast group Therapy the other day. There was that section of Pimp Your Podcast, and
yeah.
actually no, I might have put this in the podcasters group on Google. Is I shot up to number 2 at least for just a moment of hours on the college and high school section of the sports. And I was like, oh, I'm screenshotting that bad boy. I know you guys say don't obsess over your stats and your rankings.
Oh no, that's a good one.
That was something. I was number 2 behind ESPNU and ahead of, I think, Rivals.com or CBS Sports. I was like, screenshot.
There you go. Erik, what was your, are you done in your laboratory yet?
I'm scrolling down now through movies and songs, albums, TV episodes, podcasts. Short Time Wrestling Podcast is number 1 for me.
Okay, well then we'll just shoot Dave in the head. Knowing Dave, I probably typed it wrong.
Shotcast. He comes up with some drinking podcast.
Shot Tim or something. Yes.
That was what I might have done when I was in college for 7 years.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, let's go ahead and start digging into the content. So, Erik, I'll let you lead off again.
The thing I love about your content, Jason, is you have some solid questions, and I love the way you ask them. I can tell that you've kind of been around journalism for a long time because you ask great questions that are quick and to the point. And Dave, if you could play selection number 2 there for me, if you have that handy.
You're on the team with another Hawkeye, Brent Metcalf, and what's it mean to be on the team with another guy that's from Iowa, and you guys have been training at the Hawkeye Wrestling Club?
It's awesome, and I'm really excited about it. And I think he's really excited about it too.
The thing I love about questions like that is you give a little background about the question and about your guest, but then you don't ask that question. Like, oh, you're on the team with another Iowa Hawkeye. How cool is that? It's like, okay, well, I really don't have anything to say because you just kind of stole the answer. Well, you give a little background, and then we kind of go in a different direction, and you ask to dig deeper into that. I love the fact that the question's short. It's to the point. You do a nice job with that throughout the podcast. There's another one where you ask about his fiance. Right in the beginning there, he talks about his fiance kind of pushes him into it, and you ask, tell me how that discussion went. And I thought that was a great question. It really led him down a path to tell us a great story about how he got back into doing his things. You do a nice job of doing your homework and learning the background of the question, and then without dragging the question out for a ridiculously long time. I call it the Bob Costas question, because if you ever listen to Bob Costas do an interview, his questions are about 4.5 minutes long, and then you're like, Bob, where's the question in this? Because he's given so much information. Where you just you jam a bunch of information into about 2 sentences, and you hit the question and you let your guest shine. And I think that's fantastic. I love listening to that.
And that was the other thing I noticed when I was listening. I was like, wow, he knew his fiance was a volleyball player, and that was like, oh, here's a guy who's definitely done his homework. So when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's very cool that you knew that, because somebody who's just doing a quick Google search or whatever is probably, I don't know how public that is or whatever, but I just thought, wow, that's kind of cool. He had to do some digging, or here's a guy that again is immersed in the community to get that kind of information. So
well, and with that, let me just expound on that point. Because I cover wrestling so much, I was at the World Team Trials in Madison, Wisconsin. I was in that interview where he was with the media. So he said his fiance. I was like, I don't know his fiance's name. One of the guys that I'd mentioned in one of the early questions, the guy Izzy Martinez, I've known him for about 9 or 10 years. I sent him a text to go, hey, what's actually, and I know his agent too. I go, hey, what's Tony's fiance's name? And they said Megan, and I was like, okay, I got to remember that because I was lining him up to get him on the show later. So, and you follow people on Twitter, you can kind of figure out who they're responding to. It's basically kind of social media research for maybe people that are out there maybe watching this is like, how did he do that? Well, sometimes it's all over Twitter. You just got to look.
Yeah, it's that journalism background that you have. It's just kind of creeping out where you find the rocks and turn them over until you get the answer you're looking for.
And for me, go ahead.
Well, I had one comment, Dave, on that particular point there where you were talking about his fiance being a volleyball player, and it really helped having another Division I athlete in the household. There were a couple of questions where you asked yes/no questions, and being a journalist, you know that leads into a dead end quick. So just keep an eye on that. That one was one right there where you say, she's a volleyball player, right? And he said, yeah, she plays volleyball. And then you had to come back with that's got to help having another Division I athlete in the household. And he said, yeah, that helps a lot. And then finally he ran with it because he needed something to say. But you asked two yes/no questions back to back there, which kind of made him get creative to answer the question. So just kind of keep an eye on those yes/no questions. It didn't come in very often. You only did it a couple times. Most of your questions were spot on, great open-ended questions, getting your guests to tell great stories, which was fantastic. I loved your questions.
What I liked was you did have some great questions on from a standpoint of who's listening, and obviously wrestlers are going to be listening to this. So you got into like when you asked him what do you need to work on, and he then revealed it. I'm like, wow, cool guest that he's going to say, here's my weaknesses, and number two, here's how I'm going to go about and do that. And then another one, I have a clip here where apparently he was on some sort of show, and instead of saying, what was it like to be on TV, because who's going to go, well, I hated it, he had a cool answer. So
speaking of the Flow series, what was it? How did they approach you on that? Because it was a pretty solid thing. I thought it was pretty well done. But at the point, you have to look at it. Were they going to focus on your college career, or were they going to focus on your international career? Because collegiately, yes, you won an NCAA Division I championship, but internationally, and you made one junior world team, you really weren't accomplished on that level yet. So was there any hesitation in giving them the access and seeing more behind the scenes with Tony Ramos than you were accustomed to?
And I like that question for one other cool thing. You politely said, hey, you know what? You really weren't ready for primetime yet, and yet they're giving you this show. And I was like, wow, that's kind of a interesting way to spin that to the guest. I was like, here's a guy who's not afraid to ask a slightly uncomfortable question as to, how'd you get that gig? So I thought that was kind of cool, and it then gave the behind-the-scenes view of how that guy got it, not just what was it like to get it, how did you get it, because, again, there might be another wrestler out there that goes, how can I get on that show? So I thought that was a cool kind of, again, going towards the story of that. So, yes, I heard it.
I was just going to say, Jason, that I love the fact that you do journalistic homework before you got into your interviews, because it led to great questions. You asked the question about the other Hawkeye being on the team and the relationships that created. You asked about his relationship with his coaches. You asked about what's next. Are you thinking about going into movies? And he's like, hey, if somebody wants to pitch me a movie, I'm not going to turn that down. There were great questions, and it wasn't your everyday, how do you get prepared for a match? Who tapes your hands for you? What was your all-time favorite match? Things like that. Where he gets into talking about he was wrestling that 14-year-old back when he was in high school, and he flexed, and that's what kept him off the all-tournament team. Things like that. There were great stories, and you led him there, and you let him tell the story, and you let him shine, which made you both look great. It's obvious that you knew the answer and you knew the information, but you let him tell it, and you just threw those softballs to him and let him knock him out of the park. And I thought that's a sign of a solid interviewer right there. Nice job.
Now, there are a couple podcasts I've done where I am interested in match preparation. I actually one of the reasons I actually used this show I wanted you guys to review is because it was the first one I had actually included listener questions. I put it out on social media. I have a feedback form on the page that people can submit their questions. That was kind of toward the end of the show. And this was the first one that I had actually incorporated those listener questions. So I kind of left those questions that I might have had on my initial list of things to ask. I let the listener ask that question. So it served two purposes. One, it answers a question I think most of our listenership would want to get, and two, it would engage the listener who had spent their time to send in the question. And one of the kids, kid that asked a question from Oregon, I actually know his dad, and they post on our message boards quite a bit, and he's a huge Ramos fan. So, getting a 16-year-old kid to have his question answered by one of his heroes is another reason why some of those, like, well, how do you get prepared for a match? I let the users ask those questions versus taking the time on the front half of the interview with it.
I liked that listener question segment for a couple different reasons. One, you didn't let it go on too long, because listeners, unlike you and the research that you've done, will ask questions that that might get too geeky. Hey, in that match that you had on December 17th, 2013, when you were fighting that one guy from the one school, and he had you in that, he had you pinned, and you ended up doing the leg kick and got out. How'd that work? And it's like nobody remembers any of that. They can get way too technical. And you didn't let it do that. You kept it kind of focused, and you picked like a handful of the best questions that you received and just asked those. So you didn't let it get out of hand. And the other thing was they ask fun questions and questions that a lot of times you wouldn't ask, like, who would you fight? Who's the one guy you'd want to wrestle who's not a wrestler? And the guy says Mike Tyson, which I thought was a great answer. It gets fun answers out of your guests with questions that might be a little off the cuff or not quite as professional as you might ask.
Well, I had one follow-up. The teammate Metcalf, I got him later on, and actually that was the first interview that I'd actually gotten a SpeakPipe audio interview, and that was actually before I submitted that one. Now that I'm looking back on, man, I probably should have done that one. But one of them was about why do a pack of hot dogs come in 8 and buns come in 10 and come in 8. It was one of those, and I'm like, and I sat there and I looked at it and I go, you know what, I'm going to throw this question in there because it's not me asking it, it's a fan, and I just had to frame it with a little bit of not comedy, but a little lightheartedness, and the response was, man, that's a good question. I don't know, why do they come in 8 and 10? So even if a fan's going to throw a goofy question out there, I'm not just going to poo-poo it because I don't like it. Now, there's some questions that there's some editorial role that goes into it. I'm going to be like, I don't necessarily, the show can be controversial with certain questions, but the point is really to get the wrestling community to understand these athletes just beyond the wrestling. That's where, in another episode, I had one of the wrestlers, his brother had died a couple years ago, and we talked about, what he was doing to preserve his memory and things like that. I want to get that type of stuff out of him. But one of the listener questions was actually the same thing. That was one I was actually going to keep. And every listener that submitted a question that didn't get read, I sent them an email and thanked them for the question and explained why it wouldn't get in. In many cases, it was already a question asked, or they had submitted a question for a previous guest. So I wanted to get new people on for the first time.
There you go. Working that community. Awesome. Well, I have another clip here, and I don't understand my own notes. It says, great story, except. So we'll find out what this, I'll understand when I see it.
I've been covering sports for about 20 years, and I've been in a lot of arenas and a lot of different sports. Oh. That is the loudest I've ever heard any arena in my career. And it was one of the...
I'm going to stop my own self here. I love this clip because it's a great story, and you're relating something, and I'm trying to picture what it had to be like there. So.
I've been covering sports for about 20 years, and I've been in a lot of arenas and a lot of different sports. That is the loudest I've ever heard any arena in my career. And it was one of those moments that was like, and I even remember taking the picture from the Des Moines Register and putting it as my background on my computer and going, it's moments like this is why I enjoy covering wrestling. It's seeing that raw emotion. It was like, I got chills, man. And it's I'm not trying to blow smoke here, but that was one of the cooler experiences because it's Carver Hawkeye. It's an iconic arena with wrestling. And now let's describe that moment a little bit. I mean, you pin Jordan Conaway. It's a big duel. It's Iowa. It's Penn State. There's a lot of angry and fans that like to chirp at Cale because he was a Cyclone and now he's at Penn State. And of course, Iowa, obviously being kind of one of the beacon programs of college wrestling. What was it like to get the fall, have the flex, and have that place just go nuts?
I hated it. It was the worst day of my life.
Point taken.
Yeah, you did one of my pet peeves, and I see it all the time. You just won. You just broke the scoring record. how do you feel? And so when I see a sports person ask a question that I know the answer and I'm not the guest, I'm like, really? Now, on the other hand, you did one earlier, similar, but he had a good story behind it. So I'm like, ask that question, because you are going to have those times when they're going to come up with some weird thing like, I was happy as, hot pudding on a, pancake or something. And you're like, what? Wow, I got to keep that in. But if it's just your typical sports answer, I don't know. On one hand, you want to hear that. I don't know. I'm not much. I live in Cleveland. There's nothing here to cheer about in sports, so I don't know what to say.
They had a walk-up grand slam today.
Did we? All right, excellent.
Kid from my hometown got his first major league win today on the mound for the Indians.
There you go. So that was just.
Jason, when you come into questions like that, instead of saying how did it feel, spin it a little bit and say, who was the first person you called, and how did you describe it to them, or how did you tell them about it, or when did it finally sink in, or when was the first time you saw it on the news or read it in the newspaper, where they can kind of relive that exhilaration. Without saying, oh, yeah, it felt great. I loved it. I was pretty pumped. And the same pat answer. Flip it a little bit and figure out how you can reframe the question to get a similar answer, but one we haven't heard before.
Yeah, I agree there, because I've had, in my career, I've had to go from interviewing Olympic champions to 13, 14-year-old freshmen who just get their first varsity win or something. So I've had all kinds when it comes to interviews, and some questions are open-ended. I learned the yes-no question, never ask to the high school freshman. You can maybe get that with guys that are a little more seasoned with the media, but the high school kids, never ask yes-no questions.
Yeah, you're going to take a nosedive quick with that kid.
All right, so we're going to shift gears over to your website. Now, I went out to the Open Mat. Should I be looking at audio.theopenmat? Or
yeah, audio is the landing page for Short Time, and
okay.
I try to make sure that I put Short Time content on our main landing page, and the branding is almost the layout and the WordPress theme is identical with a few modifications, but everything that's audio is on audio.theopenmat.com. Since we actually built the subdomain before I had a name for the show, I knew I wanted to do something, and we needed a landing page, and I felt that the podcasts were getting buried in our news content on the news.openmat side, and the PowerPress thing, and we were in a situation where our domain name was shifted around because of the work relationship with the other company we were in went south, and that kind of led to the 301 redirects not working correctly. So that was kind of a reason why we had audio just kind of standing there, and I was like, all right, well, let's use the audio site for Short Time. So that's kind of why the domain name is what it is. I haven't gotten a redirect for it yet. That's kind of on my to-do list, is shorttimepodcast.com or something like that. That'll redirect to it. It might be a little easier. But the name of the company is the Open Mat. That's the name of the website. So I can understand where the audio dot might be a little tricky. So.
Yeah, I just was curious. So when you go there now, the way you describe this type of website, it's a magazine style, meaning there's lots of little blurbs, mainly the headline of the story, with typically, like you have here, pictures, and you have a lot of great pictures, and a lot of action. And the one thing I love, when I first got here, I know very little about wrestling, but when I saw that you were featuring Dan Gable, I'm like, whoa, because I know enough that Dan Gable is like a wrestling god, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. Dan Gable's on this website, and so I walked down and I see that there's Mike Golick, and so you've got some cool guests. I was like, that's really, really cool, and so it's a lot of information. The only thing that I thought of is, in a magazine style, the one thing that you're looking to grab people's attention with is the headline, and half your headline is usually short time 63, short time this, where you're not really cutting off the I don't think you are. No. the headline wrap. So you're okay. I just saw that.
And this theme, it gives us the option to add a feature headline. So instead, if you scroll back up, and you'll see where it says short time the carries, and that's Kerry Regner and Kerry Bowman's. Well, if you scroll below it, you'll see the title is talking with that theme. That 3-deck, 4-deck headline would cover the picture completely. So this theme gives us the opportunity to give a quick hitter, kind of like it's kind of an ESPN clone type of theme. So it's like on the main site, Nenad Lalovic's running unopposed, and the headline is FILA President Nenad Lalovic to run unopposed in September. Well, that would cover the whole thing. It's just kind of a quick boom, Lalovic running unopposed, and it's kind of a little bit of the, I wanted a newspaper ESPN-ish type of theme with it. So, and that I think keeping the same theme with short time helps with familiarity for people to come over. It's like, oh, this is the same type. They kind of know it's the same company, even though the logo might slightly be different, but almost everything's the same. So. That theme is what gives us the slider. That's the only thing where those headlines are visible. You click the story, it's the full headline, and below it, I'm pointing at the screen like you guys can see that. Like you can, that's why I list maybe 12, 15 episodes below it, so you see the past guests. You gotta scroll just a hair, but.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you've got your subscribe and follow buttons right up top, so it makes it easy. And you've got it. I like the fact that instead of having a button that says play, you have want to surf and listen, which is one of the advantages of that button is that it does open up in a brand new window. So I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, just pointing out the obvious. Erik, your thoughts on the website?
I like the listen, the subscribe buttons as well. The thing I really appreciated about the website was the way you teach people how to listen. There's that little tutorial there on how to listen up top, which I thought was really cool, kind of taking wrestlers and athletes who maybe aren't as technically inclined and teaching them how to get into podcasting. As podcasters, we think everybody knows how to listen to a podcast. And I really appreciated your tutorial page there on how to listen. I found it difficult to find the podcast when I was on the news.openmat.com because from the podcast, from audio.theopenmat.com, if you click on the open mat up top or on the mat, I believe that takes you over to news.theopenmat. No, that's not the one. Where was the one I was looking at? Maybe that's the one.
Short time, the audio page has a menu at the top. It says theopenmat.com. Takes you right over to the news side.
Yeah, so, once I got to the news side, I found it hard to get back to the podcast side because there wasn't a real clear link here unless you go over under features and then podcasting, or you scroll all the way to the bottom and you look at the footnotes.
Yeah, that's one of the limitations with this theme is I've even tweaked the CSS a bit to give us actually 2 more menu items than what the theme itself usually provides, and we've got to cram a lot of different categories in there with the menus because we can't. I mean, the homepage is busy, so I'm still I'm actually interested in feedback on maybe because on this initially I had it on the sidebar underneath the main slider where. When you scroll down, once you got the what's new and then the scrolling stories, on that right column was a short time kind of landing page. And with the way the site functions, it's basically a lot of widgets. It's drag and drop, and you kind of, I like, have one long widget and the other ones will slide in. And I had a short time one there, and I was looking at the real estate going, okay, the recruiting news is kind of big. It's a balance of where do I want to put that real estate? Because I've got a widget ready to go that it looks very similar to what's on the short time. Actually, it's almost the same widget. Same code is actually there. That's on the short time page. That was on the 3rd column underneath the don't miss or what's new section. So I've got that there. It's just when the news flows in, it's kind of hard to give up some of that real estate.
Yeah, it's real estate and priorities and where you have to land your real estate. Dave, if you can scroll down just a little bit, there's this right here, theopenmat.com, Short Time Wrestling Podcast. You have that little graphic there, how to listen to tutorials. I love that little graphic. I mean, it's eye-catching. The blue circle's eye-catching. It'll lead you to the website. If you had something like that on the news.theopenmat.com, that might take me back over to the podcast or something like that. I know real estate's prime, and you have to make decisions on where to direct people. But that was just a little confusing on my part. And features, taking me from features to a podcast was a little confusing for me. I thought the website overall, I liked the clean look. I love the magazine layout of it. I thought you could use a little more white space to kind of draw the eye to some of the articles.
There's two sides to that story, because on one hand my mind was kind of like, wow, there's a lot going on here. The flip side of that is it's a little busy, and I appreciate both. But on the other hand, if you have a magazine style theme, it's because you got a lot going on. That's why you use a magazine style, because if there wasn't that much going on, you could get by with your traditional theme. So it's not really a negative. It's just when you first go there, you're kind of not sure where to start. But that's where the headlines come in.
And if you're a wrestling fan, man, you got it all on your website. I love that. I love that you're not going to miss a thing. If you come to this website and you're looking for some news on wrestling, it's on here somewhere, which I thought was great. The one thing that confused me was the TOM acronym.
Yes, I have that. I go, who's Tom?
Because you don't use the TOM acronym in your podcast. And it wasn't really explained until I realized, because I was listening to the Short Time podcast, and then we were on the website, we're talking about Tom, and I thought Tom was maybe the head guy or the guy that did the magazine, or I didn't know who Tom was.
Tom is the nickname for the little guy that's up at the top of the screen, the icon, the guy with the headset.
The blue guy.
And he's wearing a singlet on the news side, so it's kind of that, but Tom, the open mat. So
yes,
within wrestling circles, yes, it's people kind of know what Tom is. At least that's what we're trying to get across. But it's part of that in the show close was I didn't really want to say the Open Mat Magazine or the Open Mat Magazine Junior. So we just kind of call it Tom Junior for short. And if you see right there on the Tom magazines on the right panel there, you see the magazine's name is Tom. So, I mean, it stands for the Open Mat. So, again, some of that's kind of being newish, but it's definitely something. It's been a concern, and it's one thing I definitely wanted your guys' feedback on, because not everybody that discovers my show knows knows about the website. I mean, there might be some of this is to try to capture people that might have wrestled at one point that have gotten out of it, that might be listening to wrestling podcast or listen to podcasts and find something about wrestling and go, oh, cool, and kind of bring them back into the sport too.
So overall with the website, I love the way that it's easy to subscribe there with your links. I love the fact that you teach people how to use it, and I love the magazine layout.
Yeah, it's definitely, you have the right kind of, because I've seen people use a magazine style theme, and they don't have the information to populate it, and it looks kind of silly at that point.
And a lot of times when you see that, Dave, the information doesn't change. Like you'll go back next week, and 3 stories are new, and the other 18 are the same stories they've had on for the past 4 months.
Yeah, so your initial reaction is, wow, there's a lot going on here, and then you go back later, like, no, maybe there's not.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. Well, with the news site, that one changes constantly because it's always based. But the short time side, I want the longer list there because I don't know if even using long tail is the right word here, but there are people that might discover the show for the first time, and they might not. If you've only got 5 stories up on the front, you don't. I mean, I want them to go find David Taylor really quickly, and I think he's still on the front page. There are names that people are like, oh, you got Taylor, I want to click there. Oh, there's one with Gable, I want to click there. So, the short time page only changes when there's new shows. And granted, we're putting out 3 shows a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 2 of which I produce myself, and again, the third is the one out in Iowa. So, yeah, it changes 3 times a week, but it doesn't change dramatically.
Yeah, I have no problem with you leaving archive articles up there. The articles that are good and you have great names doing it, but you're always putting new content up there. There's new content being added to the site each week, which gets added to the top, and things kind of move down. Though they stay on the list, you're still adding new content. What Dave and I are talking about are those that use that magazine layout and never add new stuff. And every time you go back, it's the same thing. Like nothing's changed. There's no reason to come back again because it's all the same stuff you saw last time. Where you're actually adding new content. It may not be 18 new articles every day, but it's new articles every week.
That's
right.
The news site. During the season, geez. One day I think I posted 25 new items, and a lot of them are press releases, but yeah, it's... Yeah.
The other thing that I've seen that look good, that I've seen, again, other people, it again proves that there's something going on this site, is your forum. Actually has people in it, actually has people chiming in, and I was like, okay. Because a lot of times the forum is just a giant, you know, you go there and there's just crickets. So, again, it's a little social proof.
That or spam bots.
Yeah, or spam bots, exactly. So when I looked at it, I was like, wow, this is actually a forum, and there's actually people here. And the other thing that I always love is you can see the last post, and when the last post is the same person, it's like, no, there's actually more than one person here that's active in the forum. So I was like, from an outsider standpoint, I was like, well, this looks like a forum that is getting some activity. So that was the other thing on the website that I had in my notes. I'm like, all right, good job on, because forums are not easy. They take a lot of work to.
I hate them. Honestly, I hate them because when I was at USA Wrestling, we had they have a site called themat.com, which is, you know, kind of go figure. I worked for them for 3 years. That moderating the message board was one of my jobs. And while we have a forum on the open mat, it's not nearly as it doesn't get the traffic, and it doesn't get the degree of crazy wrestling fan who feels they can say anything about anybody at any given time. So, you know, having this forum be less of a headache is really nice. I've had a couple message boards throughout the years that are just like, I don't understand what's wrong with people. So, you know. But another thing with the board is I've actually there's a whole board that's strictly for short time podcasts. So whenever there's an update, I post it there too. So not a whole lot of reads on that, since I think most of those people might be listening anyway, or they're following us on Twitter. So, you know, it's kind of, you know, it's overkill in some ways, but there's some people like, oh, I didn't realize this was even here, and they've been reading the board for years.
Got it. And Erik, we had another clip of yours. You want to set that up?
Oh, yeah, sure. This is just another example of one of your interview questions, Jason, and you don't do this often, but let's take a listen to it, and then I'll kind of explain what we're listening to.
Back in 2009, and you were talking about there were no cadet worlds when you were coming through, and they stopped us, I believe, in 99 or 2000, and then picked them back up in 2011. But at the junior level in 09, you were 5th at the junior worlds at 55 kilos, and looking at the FILA rankings, the number 7 wrestler in the world right now is Hassan Rahimi in your weight. He won the weight that year, which was in Ankara, Turkey. The bronze medalist was Vladimir Kinchegashvili. He's ranked number 1 in the world right now. Are you chomping at the bit to get a chance to tie up with those guys? I mean, looking at the draws, you didn't wrestle either of them that year. They both won medals. You were 5th. Are you kind of looking back and going, I finally get a chance at these guys?
Oh, yeah, I'm excited. And
all right, so what I was saying is you don't do this very often, but in this one in particular, you asked the question and then you kept talking. And there were 3 times as you were talking where he tried to jump in to start answering the question, and you continued on. So through it, you're setting up these 2 guys that he didn't have a chance to wrestle before, and you ask him, are you chomping at the bit to get another crack at these guys? And instead of stopping there and letting him ask, again, you continued on and drew out the question a little more, adding even more content, which he probably would have added in his answer. And this was the only question I heard you do that. I just wanted to bring it to your attention and make sure that you keep an eye on doing that. Once you hit your question and he's ready to answer, stop and let him go. If you need to follow up to provide more information or a little more clarity on the question, you can jump back in later on in his answer. But once you hit that question mark, stop and just let him run with it.
Yeah, I've got nothing to combat that with, because you're 100% correct there. The only thing I think I did there is, I try to. I've got tendency to ramble sometimes, where I'm like the Costas thing, trying to get so much in there to give the backstory, so people are like, "Who is Bekon Grigoriev?" or something like that. And that's maybe a situation where I was trying to give a little bit of background for the listener to set the question up right, and it just ended up tanking mightily.
Got it. Hey, Erik, are you hearing static?
I got some buzz on him.
Yeah,
Just on that question, though.
I was like, it's weird. All of a sudden, you went really. I was like, Interesting.
Like, what do you call it, Dave? Bacon frying underwater.
Yes, bacon frying underwater, exactly.
Not sure what happened.
Let's see here.
Dave, you remember back in the day when Mom used to use the blender and it made the static on the television?
Yeah, dude, I remember that.
It's kind of what it was. Mom, turn the blender off.
Imagine if we were doing all this podcasting stuff back then. I mean, how much stuff I'm looking at just my desk, which is very, very meager with my setup, and the amount of, I got, 2 screens, the board, the switcher for the monitors, the printer. Geez, if you're thinking about doing podcasting then, you blow the whole house.
So we just won't ask Jason any more questions.
Yeah, Jason, it only comes when you talk. I don't know what happened. And it's only those 2 answers.
Is it when I talk?
Yeah, it's when you talk.
Huh. Right now, you're hearing it.
Yeah.
Try this.
I think it might be because I'm trying to get these cords. I know I've noticed this one on Google Hangouts. When I go through my iMic, instead of going straight to the ATR on the USB, let me try to change my audio settings.
Go to settings and
ATR. How about now?
Much better.
Yeah. That's one thing I've been trying to figure out with my USB interface, because I got one of the newer Macs that doesn't have the in and out.
Yeah.
So I've got the extra bus, and with Google Hangouts, I've heard that before. Because I record everything out to Roland, so it's coming through my board anyway. I don't pick that up when I'm recording, but that's the second time I've heard that on a Google Hangout. So.
But it didn't happen the whole way through. It just happened on that particular incident.
It might have been. I might have picked up, because I went to pick up my phone because I saw something come in, and that I might have moved a cord that, got on another cord and it didn't like that. So.
Yeah, maybe.
All right.
Anyway, we're fine now.
Yeah,
we're good.
Love technology.
That's it. And how are we going to do the ending here? Do we want to play what we have and I'll just fix it later?
Yeah, do that. Just go ahead and.
Okay.
Intro the ending like you normally would, and then roll it, and then you can edit it.
Fix it in later. So anybody watching this video, that's what happens. So there you go. I'm probably pulled. Well, the other thing that's with the video, and this is something I need to work on, because when I play a clip, it gets stuck on me. So I'll go and click on you guys just to give you guys a little love, and then I'll forget to turn that off. So then the rest of the interview is like, there's a lot of the beginning of this interview that you're listening to me. You're watching me listen to Jason while he's talking. I'm like, oh, yet another thing to think about. So for anybody watching this video, my apologies. So, all right, let me hit. I hit pause when he turned into RoboCop. I'm like, okay. So, all right. So we're gonna roll out your ending here. As always, we listen to the beginning of it. We always like to listen to the end, and it went a little something like this.
The Short Time Wrestling Podcast is brought to you by Flips Wrestling. Train alone or train out loud at flipswrestling.com. Like what you hear on Short Time? Drop us a line and leave a review on iTunes by going to theopenmat.com/iTunes and tell us what you think. Give us a 5-star rating if you feel it's appropriate, because we know you think it's appropriate. And also go to theopenmat.com/subscribe and find out how you can get both digital magazines of the Open Mat Magazine and Tom Jr. for just one low price. Again, leave us a review on iTunes at theopenmat.com/iTunes and subscribe to the Open Mat at the Open.
And there you go. Little added silence for ease of editing later. So, kind of like the intro, we kind of have a lot going in there. Erik, you want to chime in?
Not nearly as much as the intro, but yeah, there are a couple different things. The sponsor's quick. I like that. Hey, the podcast today is sponsored by wrestling sponsor, which I thought was nice. I usually try and get people to make one call to action at the end of their podcast. Make it easy for your listener to do whatever it is you want them to do. The thing I liked about your close is both of your calls to action were go to the website and take action. So whether it was go to the website /iTunes or go to the website /subscribe for the magazine, you had both things there. What I might recommend is you create one podcast page that has all of that information on there. So your one call to action is, hey, if you want to leave a review on iTunes, we made it easy for you. Also, if you want to subscribe to the magazine, you can do that too. Go to theopenmat.com/podcast or slash
Feedback,
short time, whatever you happen to make it, and then have both of those things right there for them. So you only have one call to action, and it's sending them to that one page. And then on there you can have the, hey, here's how to contact us. Here's how to leave a speak pipe. Here's how to get involved with the show. Here's where you can email us. Here's where you can send us large sums of money if you'd like to. Here's where you can give us a review on iTunes. Whatever you need, it's all on that one page. So the conclusion was pretty clean.
Yeah.
You just had two different slash call to action, and it got a little confusing there. Otherwise, pretty strong.
And I have no scientific proof to put on this. I just know in a branding thing, if it's theopenmat.com/short, maybe, for short time, and theopenmat.com/ whatever the other name of the podcast is, because I get worried about people typing in something.theopenmat.com. For me, I always try to make domain names as easy to spell as possible. What do you guys think? Is a domain name kind of a weird, like, what do you mean I have to type in dot before your domain name? That's just me. I just was like, I don't know if subdomains are going to throw people for a loop. That could
you
be
mean like audio.theopenmat.com?
Yeah, I was like, why not
theopenmat.com?
Yeah, why not theopenmat.com/podcast? I don't know.
Well, what I actually have is I actually have Pretty Link on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, when I set up Pretty Link on the short, that was the first one I used. Was on the short time side. Is I couldn't type in certain words for some reason. Like I wanted, /Spreaker. Well, I had to type go to Spreaker for it to work. It just wouldn't work for some reason. Now on the news side, all the links are theopenmat.com/Spreaker, theopenmat.com/iTunes, theopenmat. They go to the same place. So, I've got two sets of them. It's just maybe for what you were saying, direct to the simple theopenmat.com side versus the audio.theopen, because I've got them set up. I set them up just for that. If for some reason Pretty Link wasn't working for me the way I wanted it to. So.
Yeah,
I've actually thought about that. So
yeah, like I said, I have nothing to base that on. It was just where I'm like going, is a subdomain is that okay? Are we good enough typers? Or is that going to confuse anybody? But I was just something I threw out there. I thought, well, I'll get you guys' opinion on that. But that was just something I thought. So, but so let's move on to then. We always kind of like to wrap things up. Kind of what you did good and things you can tweak on. So for me, number one, just kudos on getting great guests, because I know that's not easy to do, and so I was like, wow, that was impressive, and I like the website. It's a lot of info on there, but like I said, when I first got there, and I saw Dan Gable and just headlines blinking all over the place, I was like, wow, this is the place. This is like the home of wrestling is here. So I definitely like that. And to me, again, I like the again, your journalistic background came through with your questions and getting the, like I said, when you were asking about that TV show, how'd you get on there, as opposed to how did it feel to be on there or something like that. So Erik, what were some of your pluses?
I too appreciate your journalistic approach to the whole thing. I thought your questions were strong. They were quick and to the point. They weren't long, drawn out, and hard to follow. You got your guest to give you creative answers and tell some great stories. I thought that was added a lot to the show. You did a nice job doing your homework without really dragging out the question. You added something to the show without just repeating what the guest was going to repeat with their answer. Your production values through the whole show were great. You know what you're doing around a board, and the show runs pretty smooth. I thought overall it was a quality performance.
Yeah, and really, the other thing I forgot to mention is I looked at your audio file. Your volume levels are fine, your tags are fine. So technically, the website and the audio, I was like, all right, well, good job for you. So when I was trying to find something that I was like, well, okay, where's kind of a room for improvement? And really, we kind of mentioned this already, is be careful with the yes/no questions. And, again, my pet peeve is please don't ask you just won $8 million. Did that make you happy? Please don't ask that question. And really,
was that pet peeve on one of the round tables? I think now that you guys, I've listened to pretty much all of them. Maybe that's where I'm getting some of these things. I'm cramming all of you guys' ideas into one thing.
Into one, here you go.
Call to action. Give yourself credibility.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a little podcast coaching overload.
So, and it sounds like you've already taken some steps for your intro and outro to kind of tighten those up a little bit. And they weren't horrible. They were, and again, it kind of goes with what's going on. You have so much going on. How do you kind of minimize that? So, Erik, what did you think?
Jason, it sounds like we're not telling you anything it doesn't sound like we're telling you anything you don't already know. We're telling you to shorten up that introduction a little bit. You're working on that. From being a journalist, you don't want to ask those yes/no questions. So you're already working on that. When you hit that question mark in the question, stop talking and let your guest answer. You already know that. So you're doing a lot of what we're already recommending. We're just trying to give you some confidence to know that you're going down the right path and you're working on the right things, and it's going to make your show stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge wrestling person, but if I know somebody, I'm going to go, here, you need to listen to this, because this is obviously somebody that's not winging it, well produced, well thought out, and is taking this serious. And so if I run into somebody who's wrestling, if I ever bump into Jay Moore, which is how I learned about Dan, the guy's name whom I can't remember now. Is it Dan Gable? Dan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was actually in the guy that did Iowa Nice, the Scott Siepker guy, and Jay Moore, his work with him. He did one called Wrestling Nice, and Jay Moore was in that too. So
okay, so I would definitely point Jay Moore at this podcast. So I'll let you do one more plug. Go ahead and tell everybody where we can find your stuff, Jason.
It's the Short Time Wrestling Podcast at audio.theopenmat.com, or subscribe on iTunes at theopenmat. Pet peeve, radio announcer voice at theopenmat.com/iTunes.
So, well, you do have a good voice.
I've done a lot of PA announcing, so
there you go. But thanks for coming on the show. We definitely appreciate the opportunity to get to know you, number one, and number two, give you a little publicity and give us our opinion. So, Erik,
well, I appreciate it. Erik, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jason.
Well, I was going to say I appreciate it, because one thing I told Dave, we had a consulting session, as I mentioned earlier, is that I've had the radio background. I've been doing this for a while. I mean, like you said, I'm comfortable around a board in levels and things like that. But just being able to reach out to people like you has really helped me, because if I have a question for any of, again, the Podmigos, as I'm calling you guys, Ray's kind of busy. He's even gotten back to me. Dave's pretty quick. Daniel's pretty quick. I know you guys are loaded with time. So, and Erik, this is the first time we've interacted. So from just a new podcaster, even though I don't really consider myself new, but new for getting involved with everything you guys are doing, it's helped me specifically. It's actually helped me to tell other people on how to. I had a guy from Iowa say, hey, I want to start a podcast. I've listened to Short Time. Who are you listening to? And I sent him, he was listening to Cliff Ravenscraft, and I said, for the beginner, you want to go to these three guys. This will probably help you. And it's funny, I live in a state with no affiliate programs, because Minnesota's laws are a little weird. So even on my gear page, each one of those links actually one goes to Dave's affiliate link page for something, one goes to Daniel's, one goes to Ray's, so I'm spreading it out. So everybody that's helped me, whether they know they've helped me or not, it's appreciated. And something like this, yes, it's a service, and I'm gladly paying for it. And everybody out there
that's watching this and is kind of hesitant, dude, seriously, or men or women, sorry, I don't want to be sexist with my reply, but I've got 4 pages of notes here. And while they said there's a lot of things I already knew, but this is feedback that you're going to get from people that aren't in your niche. So kind of a testimonial for you guys and what you guys do. This has helped me so much, just, again, with the notes. And sometimes you need to hear things from somebody that's not your wife. I mean, she sits right over here in her desk and hears me. She's like, "Oh, great, you got a podcast again." So it's one of those things that sometimes you can be told the same thing 10, 15 times by somebody close to you, but when you hear it from somebody else, it resonates a little bit more. So I'm thankful for that. The whole podcasting community, like I told Dave in the beginning before we started, was I'm listening to podcasts from podcasters I like listening to. And I'm with Nick Suberling and his SPNT podcast network now because he's got niche sports, and that's something that obviously college and Olympic level wrestling is. And I'm listening to Inside the Jungle, and I don't care about the Cincinnati Bengals. Yet I'm listening to his show because it's so well done, and it's spoken with passion, and some of the minor league baseball thing. I mean, all those shows within that network. And then I don't consider myself a tech geek, but I listen to Todd Cochran shows. I listen to The Feed from Libsyn. I listen to all these things, and everybody that's in this space is contributing to every little thing I improve on. So that is something I really generally appreciate, and I think it's made my podcast better. I think it could get better, and I think it's helped the community of wrestling fans who are actually consuming this and learning more about podcasting. So that's the reason I put the tutorial out is, hey, people say, what's a podcast? I don't have an iPod, I can't listen. So that was a reason for a tutorial. And again, I think one of those was a tip from one of the Podmigos, as I'm calling you guys, or whatever. Again, I get the tendency to ramble. Again, I'm thankful for everything you guys do, and for people like me. And I've heard Gary Leland's with the FastPitch.tv was the first podcast review show that I had listened to, and I was like, I want to do this.
Awesome. Well, we're glad you were here, and he didn't cry. So
and he didn't.
There's always next week. We
keep trying to make somebody cry. Somebody's going to cry before this show's done.
Erik, where can people find you?
You can find me anytime you'd like at podcasttalentcoach.com. Worksheets up there to help you structure your show, and any way I can help you refine your content and turn it into engaging entertainment, I'd love to help you. Find it at podcasttalentcoach.com.
And you can find me at schoolofpodcasting.com. And
yeah.
Hit it, ladies.
Yes, exactly. And if you'd like to get reviewed, simply go to podcastreviewshow.com/review me, and you will have your smiling voice and face on this podcast, and we would love to have you. It's I'm enjoying the show more and more the more we do it, and it was a little different at first, critiquing somebody face to face, but I like it, and I think the reviews are better, and I think people are getting more out of it. So in the end, I think it's a win-win for everybody. So if you want to do
they're allowed to ask questions, which really helps, and they're allowed to get clarification on our answers and things like that. So Jason, thanks for having the courage to come on the show and let us review your show. We appreciate it.
Again, it's my pleasure. Thanks for all the feedback.
All right, and we'll see you again real soon with another episode of the Podcast Review Show. Until then, remember that there's always room for improvement. Take care. See you real soon.